All right, welcome to A Growing Concern. We have a fellow with me tonight that we've been trying to get our schedules together for some time now. We finally managed to make it. It's finally working. Paul Cienfuegos has been active for many, many years. Mainly that I first heard about him was Democracy Unlimited, an organization out of Arcata. And this is going to be part of our ongoing coverage of the movement to end corporate personhood and end corporate dominance and get this country back into the hands of the people. And we're going to talk a lot about that tonight. And you see from the table here, Paul's got a lot to talk about. So welcome to the program, Paul.
Thanks, Jim. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right. Yeah, I'm glad we finally got this together. Yeah. We first started talking last July when you were first moving up here from Arcata.
That's right.
So, you know, before we get into this, how you like Portland?
I'm loving Portland, but I'm missing nature.
Missing nature?
Yeah.
Well, there's still nature here, just further to go.
Got to drive a long way.
Yeah, and the country down there is a little different than it is up here.
It's pretty wild.
So, yeah, you're just above Eureka down there, Arcata.
I was actually in Manila. That was a tiny little village next to Samoa on a sand spit between Humboldt Bay and the ocean, if you can imagine.
Oh, well, I've been through that area, mainly just 101, but beautiful area.
Yeah.
So we're going to get right back into it. I know that you were involved with passing some resolutions or things at the city council down there in Arcata, and you've been very active trying to get democracy moving down there. Well, is that kind of how it all started for you?
That is. I started Democracy Unlimited of Humboldt County in 1995, based in Arcata then. It's still going. Mm-hmm. You can look it up online at duhc.org, Democracy Unlimited of Humboldt County. And now it's in Eureka. And started in 1995, started leading workshops about corporate constitutional rights and why we got to stop them right around then. And then we passed a ballot initiative in Arcata in 1998, the Arcata Advisory Initiative on Democracy and Corporations.
Anybody follow suit in the country besides?
We thought lots of cities would, and not one did. We're still the only one.
But did they try? I mean,
they didn't even try.
They didn't even try.
There was lots of interest in it, just nobody. It's kind of amazing. It feels like activist culture has kind of died away around real organizing in this country. It's like we all want to just kind of put it out on Facebook and hope that something happens, and that's not organizing. That's networking.
That's networking. It's a good point to make that distinction. I had never made those terms before. And well, it hasn't died in this country, but I can see why one person, you could think so. I mean, this thing with Occupy Portland and Occupy Wall Street, it showed that it's not dead, and it shows that there's really a yen to get democracy back, and everybody sees what you saw apparently back in 1995, that it's getting rid of the corporate control is the mainspring.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, and I just want to suggest that you, I hope it's okay to make a suggestion like this to you, that you stop saying corporate personhood and that you start saying corporate constitutional rights instead, because although the phrase corporate personhood is out there and everybody's using it, it's actually only about half of their rights. And that's a real problem.
So there's rights above and beyond the personhood
their
rights.
Personhood rights.
This is interesting, sure.
Yeah, so the personhood rights kick in 1886 with the Santa Clara County versus Southern Pacific Railroad Supreme Court decision, where the Supreme Court finds corporate personhood rights in the 14th Amendment, as if corporations were the same as freed slaves. It was a pretty outrageous decision, because that's what the 14th Amendment was about, giving personhood rights to to freed male slaves.
Weren't slaves considered 3/5 of a human being?
Until that decision. Yeah, until 1886. But before 1886, there was Supreme Court decision after Supreme Court decision that had nothing to do with personhood, starting in the early 1800s, that gave corporations significant constitutional rights. And so it's one of the issues I have with the Move to Amend campaign that frames everything as abolish corporate personhood. And I and my colleagues have been trying to nudge them to be a little more expansive and say, we need to end corporate rights, all rights, not just the ones that come from personhood.
So you think it would be better to try for the whole banana at once rather than say half-stepping with Move to Amend?
I think rights are the essential piece. Yeah, so the two essential rights that have nothing to do with personhood are in the Constitution, there's something called the Commerce Clause and there's something called the Contracts Clause. And they're both very short and obscure. And the Supreme Court found corporate rights in both of those clauses in 1819 and in the mid-1800s. And basically, the Contracts Clause, I'll try to do this very briefly. So in 1819, the Supreme Court decided that the corporate charter that had always been the document that state legislatures used to define into existence a corporation, right? A corporation is a state actor, right? The state legislature historically created them out of the blue to fulfill a specific social need and to cause no harm. And they gave them all these requirements and prohibitions, and the charter was the mechanism for defining what a corporation was required to be, was prohibited from doing, blah, blah, blah.
And that's why they went to, what was it, New Jersey or something? Because
exactly,
it had the
in the late
laws.
1800s.
Right, yeah.
So, but in 1819, the Supreme Court decided that that state legislatures, after they wrote the charter, needed to be hands-off after that. Because a charter, all of a sudden, they saw as a legal contract, and the government needed to be hands-off. It's an obscure decision, but it's really significant. It was the beginning of the end of a corporation being subordinate to we the people. That's a big deal.
It's a really big deal.
That's a right. That's a corporate right.
Thomas Jefferson really worked hard to get that into the... However, I can't remember how it was done, but I remember he was really very wary of corporate rights and corporations, but I think it was Madison was all for it.
Madison believed that the primary purpose of government was to protect the opulent against the majority.
Mussolini would have been proud of him.
So then the other one is the Commerce Clause, and that's kicked in the mid-1800s, and the rights of corporations under the Commerce Clause were brought by the Supreme Court starting 1850s, 60s, and the impact of that was that hundreds and hundreds of state and local laws had existed until the mid-1800s that prohibited all sorts of activity from entering the state. Dangerous manufacturing, dangerous products. The state and the locality had legal authority to say, we can prohibit this kind of activity or the sale of this product here. And once corporations won rights, constitutional rights under the Commerce Clause, in the mid-1800s, hundreds of state and local laws were thrown out as violating corporate constitutional rights. So today, a local environmental group that's trying to stop, let's say, nuclear waste from passing through their city or coming into their city.
A lot of them have tried.
Right. What is the rationale for why you can't do it? Your own environmental activist attorney will say, sorry, we can't do that. That violates the corporate rights under the Commerce Clause. So hundreds of laws have been thrown out because it violates corporate rights. It's protectionism, which is officially a bad word in this country, right? But all that means is local and state governments protecting their residents against harm by corporations. Those are now, it's illegal to protect your community from harm under the Commerce Clause.
Under the Commerce Clause.
Okay? So these are very significant. These are massive corporate rights that happen before we ever get to personhood by corporations. And that's why I urge you and everyone I talk to use a different phrase.
Corporate, what do you call
corporate rights or corporate constitutional rights. Whatever you want.
It's interesting that you would mention that because I was just listening to a talk by Jeff Clements the other day, and he mentions that during the 70s under a Republican administration, the EPA and all these different things, I guess, in reaction to maybe what you were saying there, started to make agencies that could do what you're saying that they couldn't no longer do. And then, of course, then a guy named William Powell, I believe, or something like that, a lawyer, got onto the Supreme Court, and a whole bunch of laws came through that did away with that. So, I mean, it's just back and forth, back and forth.
Yeah, he starts the history way too late, as far as I'm concerned. You got to start the history of corporate power in the early 1800s. And Clements and Nader and the Move to Amend folks, they all seem to start it much later. I'm not sure why. Like, Ralph Nader starts the rise of corporate power around the growth of the trusts. You remember the trusts? Early 1900s, corporations are starting to become politically powerful, and they're forming this illegal trust.
And that's when they were busted up, I think.
The Antitrust Act is formed. That's the end already for citizen sovereignty over corporations. It took over 100 years to get to there, and the history that most of us get taught from, kind of classic conventional lawyers like Nader and others starts 100 years too late to really understand what happened.
To understand that the underpinnings of this had already been established there.
Yeah, that's right.
I see. And so,
whoops.
Well, that's it's part of TV here.
That's right.
His accidents. All right, there you go. But so did you understand all this in 1995, or did you learn this as you moved through?
I've been deepening since '95. I've been reading and reading and reading and listening to speeches and interviews and
So you've come to the conclusion that. I remember there was a fellow in town a while back, Lindley or something like that.
Thomas Lindsay,
and we have a graphic for his website, CELDF.
Yeah, he's the director.
He's kind of going down the road that you have taken.
He is one of my primary mentors at this point in my work. Yeah, Thomas Lindsay is the director of the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, which is a public interest law firm that has been drafting local ordinances, local laws. Now for 150 communities in 6 East Coast states. 150.
It's not just Pennsylvania then.
Oh no, it's 150 communities over the last decade have passed local laws that do extraordinary things. They prohibit a very particular, each one prohibits a specific corporate harm which is legal but harmful, considered by the locality to be harmful, like fracking, like mining, like water extraction for bottling. Nobody's done a mountaintop removal one in this paradigm of local law yet. These are the ones that have passed.
Well, how do they get
telling
past
you about?
Commerce Clause?
Hold on a sec.
All right.
I'll get there. So every one of them bans a particular kind of legal but harmful activity. Every one of them refuses to acknowledge and refuses to follow what's called the state preemption laws. State preemption says that, and every state has to deal with, every local community has to deal with this in every state. State preemption says that a local community cannot prohibit a corporate activity that's legal under state law. So the state says factory farming's legal, a local community can't ban factory farming. State says fracking's legal, it violates state preemption if you try to ban it at the local level. So every one of these ordinances refuses to recognize state preemption. They step outside of the normal legal structures of law, and they say, we can't protect our communities. We can't do the job as our elected officials. We sign an oath, right, that we're here to protect and defend the local community. And what you're telling us, what the state is telling us is bad. You can't protect your local community because it violates state preemption. So we're stepping outside of state preemption because it violates our rights of self-governance under our state constitutions. And the state constitutional language is really striking. Let me read to you, just give you one example of Oregon's, the opening lines of Oregon's state constitutions. I mean, it's remarkable. This is how our state constitution starts. Article 1, Bill of Rights, Section 1, Natural Rights Inherent in People. We declare that all power is inherent in the people, and all free governments are founded on their authority, and instituted for their peace, safety, and happiness, and they have at all times the right to alter, reform, or abolish the government in such manner as they may think proper. That's your and my rights as citizens in Oregon. Every state constitution starts with similar language.
Isn't there a move to change that to add natural before persons in there? Will that have any significant repercussions?
Well, the laws that we're going to have to write are going to have to distinguish between natural persons and corporate persons, for sure. So, but just to finish, so these 150 communities do those two things. And then some of them also enshrine rights of nature. They recognize that nature has itself constitutional rights to thrive, to be protected, to flourish, to evolve.
There's some
very interesting language.
There's some South American countries that have already
Ecuador
done
has done that.
Right,
but actually, interestingly enough, the Seldif group in Pennsylvania, they went down to Ecuador, and Ecuador learned from the Pennsylvania rural Republican farm communities that had passed rights of nature ordinances. The Ecuador learned from Pennsylvania Republican farmers.
So Evo Morales' administration.
Isn't that cool?
That's incredible. I figured it was the other way around.
Yeah, I did too. I call this reverse colonialism.
Well, I know that the Southern Hemisphere has been way ahead of the developed Northern Hemisphere in a lot of ways. And
oh yeah, well they're more democratic.
They're more democratic, right? And they take that time to listen to one another, and that is why a lot of your corporations, Coca-Cola and many others, are coming down so heavy on labor unions and things down there.
Right. And the third thing that these 150 ordinances do is they strip corporations of all of their constitutional rights, not just their personal rights, all of their rights.
Mm-hmm. Going back to 18, 19, or 16. Or
exactly. And the big victory so far is in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, November 2010, by a unanimous city council vote in Pittsburgh, 9-0. And it's a very diverse city council. 9-0. The Pittsburgh City Council banned fracking within the city of Pittsburgh, outright banned it, stripped fracking corporations of their rights, and refused to recognize preemption. So they said to the state, we don't care what the state law is about us prohibiting activities, we're doing it because we don't recognize state preemption. 9-0. And there were 200 leases being negotiated in Pittsburgh. This wasn't a symbolic action.
I was wondering about that, yeah. It's just
200 fracking leases were in the process of being implemented or negotiated there.
Well, I'm a little confused, and maybe some of the viewers are too. Now, I understood this to mean that early in corporations got rights tied to the Commerce Clause, and that they could not, states would say one way or the other whether things were allowed, and the individual townships or whatever within that state could not ban, say, what's that, nuclear,
right. And
so all of a sudden, can they do that?
Well, because they're stepping, yeah, it's the perfect question. They're stepping outside of the existing conventional structures of law.
Well, how can they do that legally?
Well, that's the big question.
That's the rub. Huh?
So you tell me, when California did this radical thing and passed medical marijuana laws, whatever that was, 15 years ago, I can't remember how long it was ago. So the federal government said, you can't, the voters don't have the authority to pass a medical marijuana law in California. If you remember this, the federal government claims sole jurisdictional authority over drug policy, drug law. But the state operates on a whole different set of laws. So California voters collect enough signatures to put something on the ballot that violates federal preemption, right? And they pass it. Now, what happens when a state passes a law that violates federal law? Well, that's a political question more than it's a legal question. And we tend as activists to just kind of shrivel away, oh, we can't do that because it's illegal, or it violates higher law or whatever. But if you think about the medical marijuana laws in 15 states now or something, or if you think about Oregon's right to die with dignity laws, which again the federal government claimed you can't pass those laws; those are federal jurisdiction.
Ashcroft took them to the Supreme Court.
That's right. So it went back and forth, and in both cases, the public beat the federal government. Now you can argue that the federal government still has the legal hammer and can come down, but honestly, how many millions of people now legally smoke and grow marijuana in 15 states? Right? The federal government has not succeeded, even though federal preemption trumps state law, because as soon as the state passes it through the ballot box, as they did, the governor, he's put into power to enforce state law, not federal law. The state attorney general, the state legislature, the sheriff, the police, they're all there to enforce state law. So all of a sudden, medical marijuana is legal. All of those legal mechanisms have to enforce the public's will. And what happens is you get a crisis of jurisdiction. That's a legal term for two jurisdictions battling it out. And which wins?
Each having a law on their side.
That's right. And who wins? That's a political question, not a legal question. Right? The marijuana users have won clearly in the medical marijuana battle, even though it violated federal law. So how are 150 municipal governments doing this? They're doing exactly the same thing. They're creating a crisis of jurisdiction, and they're daring state government to come after them and say you can't do this. And they're on very strong constitutional footing. They're using state constitutions and the preamble to the U.S. Constitution to say we have inherent rights of local self-governance, and we're using it directly through the ballot box. Or in many cases, the township electeds have passed these things in many of these 100. Actually, in all but one case, in these 150 ordinances that have already passed, almost all but one was the city or town council passed it. Well, directly.
What you're saying is basically a form of direct action.
This is civil disobedience at the municipal government level. That's right.
I love it.
They're stepping outside of these legal structures because we can't get justice within the legal structures.
It's actually even civil disobedience in a way.
It is. Yeah.
And so this is happening mostly on the East Coast from what you've been saying.
Well, so far, but there's a movement growing on this coast, and I led a couple of weekend-long workshops in Bellingham a year and a half ago, and out of that group those workshops came a study group, and out of the study group came an ordinance campaign organization that started, it was called the Local Democracy Initiating Group. I love that name.
It's great.
Initiating Local Democracy.
Reestablishing.
And in late January, just a month ago, they launched an ordinance campaign that's one of these, we call this the community rights movement. These are communities that are exercising, we're not demanding anything, we're not pleading or begging for anything. We are exercising our inherent right of local self-governance, right?
Use it
no
or lose
more
it.
begging, no more begging. Right?
Or even demanding.
Or demanding. We're exercising our inherent right to govern ourselves. So Bellingham looked at the issues that were facing Bellingham and thought, what's the issue that the voters would be most excited about in terms of a rights-based ordinance? And voila, the coal corporations were just starting to plan this massive operation of getting huge amounts of coal from Montana and Wyoming to ports on the West Coast. And I think we have a graphic
we have that
could go up.
That picture there we can get up there.
Of all of those routes. So what Bellingham, there it is. So if you notice what Bellingham is just south of Cherry Point, which is a deep water port. And the coal corporations in Wyoming and Montana are planning to ship an unbelievable amount of new mined coal, it's not even mined yet, to China for their massive growth rate to keep China electrified. And just imagine the added pollution and imagine the added climate change. Coal is like the worst thing for putting carbon in the air, right, for climate change.
Well, maybe next to the tar sands.
So the people of Bellingham, well, the volume of coal is so much greater.
You bet, yeah.
The people of Bellingham said, well, let me actually read you, because this is really exciting. So a couple of weeks ago, they launched the Bellingham Community Bill of Rights. And just yesterday, this is fresh news, the elections office in Whatcom County, Bellingham's county, approved the title and the text of their ordinance for signature gathering. So within the next week or so, they're going to start gathering signatures in Bellingham to ban coal trains from passing through Bellingham. And the only way to get to Cherry Point, which is one of the primary exit points for the coal, is to go through either Bellingham or go up a little rural route through eastern Whatcom County, where they're organizing to get something similar passed as well.
So that would be up in northern Washington.
Exactly.
There are other ports.
Exactly. But the only way to get to Cherry Point are one of those two parallel tracks. Can I read?
Sure,
can I read how this thing starts?
This is how people are.
This is very exciting. So if you go to coal-free Bellingham, if you go to Google and put in coal-free Bellingham, you'll get the campaign and the ordinance.
We need to make it a coal-free West Coast.
Exactly.
But that's a good place to start.
Yeah, and maybe they can throw the map up again, and I can talk just briefly about the other communities, because if you know of anybody who is working or living in any of these other communities, I just want to put a pitch out, because I am co-coordinating with a liaison from the Bellingham group to do outreach as rapidly as possible
to them other red
to all of those other communities that are on all of these tracks, because we want at least one community to pass Bellingham's ordinance on every one of those tracks. And I've already done workshops in Vancouver and Olympia and Shelton, Washington. In Eugene, I'm about to do one in Corvallis. I've done a bunch in Portland. Portland's on the map, folks. On the Amtrak line that goes north-south, that comes out of the Columbia Gorge and goes south, the main line is going to have up to 5 to 7 coal trains a day if we don't stop this. Each one of the coal trains 1 mile to 1.5 miles long, 100 to 150 open cars of coal with coal dust spewing out.
Tons of coal dust.
Per car. They're saying up to a ton of coal dust will be released from each car between Wyoming and the coast. That's what we'll be breathing.
And I know that the Sierra Club's been trying to shut down Boardman, and there's the coal dust just from Boardman alone that's creating devastating consequences in the Columbia Gorge.
And what Sierra Club needs to get on board around is this rights-based strategy, because what all the environmental groups are still doing is they're begging regulatory officials or begging governors or begging legislators to do something.
Begging for what is their right.
And right now, the corporations have the right to do these things. We may not like it, but until we deal with their rights, we're screwed. We are screwed. Yeah. So let me just read you the opening of the Bellingham Community Rights.
We've already used up almost half an hour here.
Oh my God. Okay. Whereas in America we have a tradition of deciding for ourselves and for our children, whereas the residents of the city of Bellingham possess the inherent and inalienable right to govern their own community on the basis without limitation of the statement within the Declaration of Independence that governments are instituted to secure the rights of people, and of the Washington Constitution's recognition that all power is inherent in the people. I'll just jump around read a few other bits here. Whereas the assertion of constitutional rights, including civil rights, by the legal constructions known as corporations, has fundamentally unbalanced our system of government, and the people of Bellingham desire to restore a balanced and democratic system of government. Whereas the state of Washington has acknowledged the threat from the use of coal, and therefore decided last year to adopt a coal-free future for Washington legislation. Whereas the people of Bellingham find it necessary to reduce the process of climate change by creating a new structure of law which recognizes that the residents and ecosystems of Bellingham have a right to a healthy, natural climate unaltered by the transporting, handling, and burning of coal, and which recognizes the rights of ecosystems to exist and flourish. I'll just read you a couple more. I'm just kind of popping around here.
They all make perfect sense.
Yep. Whereas certain distant corporate operators desire to mine coal in massive quantities in Wyoming and Bellingham and Montana, transport such coal by rail from east to west across western Washington state, etc., etc. Therefore, the people of the city of Bellingham hereby adopt this ordinance, which shall be known and may be cited as the Bellingham Community Bill of Rights. And you can look at this on Coal Free Bellingham's website. So this is just one example of what's happening. Spokane, you know, and let me say, I always try to remember to say this, these, by the way, these are not liberal or lefty or green ordinances. Almost all of the towns that have passed these have been Republican, right? This is rights, and it makes sense. You know, Republicans tend to be more rights-based, and Democrats tend to be more, the liberals tend to be more regulation-based. We're always trying to beg the state and federal government to save us through regulations, rather than trusting ourselves at the local level to do the right thing. Yeah. And at the local level, who wants to live in a poisoned town? Who wants to live in a town where the fish don't swim in the local river anymore? Nobody would vote for that.
Or if they do, you can't eat them.
Exactly. You know, I mean, if you look at the history of logging, loggers used to be fisher folk. Logging used to be something you did in the summer, and then you became a fisher folk for the rest of the year. Right? Once corporate clear cutting came in, it became year-round activity, right? But historically, loggers and mill workers would never have supported clear-cut logging because they were fishers, right?
Well, you know, originally there was no such thing as a professional legislators either.
Yeah,
you know, they were supposed to just go down there to Washington D.C. or whatever for 2 years, 4 years, and then go back to their farms. But the way this whole thing has been tilted, that's all changed.
Let's see if anybody wants. I don't know if it's on the screen yet, but if there are people who would like to call,
right, we could put that up as we
just take them as they
continue our
come.
conversation.
Because I'd love to be able to
Because we've got about 28
questions.
Minutes left, and I know you got a long list here, and this list is...
we don't have to get to everything here.
Right, and this list is... we've already talked about the coal train ban, but there, there's genetic engineering, there's fracking, there's energy, there's all kinds of different issues that all issues actually can,
this is
can
about
be dealt with
everything
in
that
this
has
way.
to do with corporate power. If you're dealing with an issue in your community, and the reason that you can't get what you need, what the majority obviously know they need, is because corporations are overpowering you in the ballot box. They're outfunding your opposition. Overwhelming you with corporate money against what you're trying to do. If they're lobbying politicians, if they're putting out lies through the media, all of those are actually corporate rights, right? If they're
that allows them to do that.
That allows them to do everything I just mentioned is about corporations having won specific constitutional rights. So we have to tackle the root cause of this problem, and we could get our elections back, and we can do it at the local level. So you've got a community, for example, I brought some details of something very exciting happening in New Hampshire, in Lancaster, New Hampshire, which is a small town that's one of the communities that still has the town hall meeting as its ultimate governing authority. They have an annual meeting, and by, I don't know if it's majority or supermajority, they pass laws at an annual town hall meeting where everybody who's a resident
it's a small town.
Shows up and votes. And they're looking at, and will probably pass in the near future, the town of Lancaster's right to a sustainable energy future and community self-government ordinance. It's a rights-based ordinance to protect the health, safety, and welfare of residents and ecosystems of Lancaster by recognizing the right to a sustainable energy future and by prohibiting the siting of new energy projects that violate the people's right to a sustainable energy future. And they're trying to use it to stop a very specific unsustainable energy facility from going in.
Is it coal?
That's called Northern Point. And I actually forgot to, or Northern Pass, and I forgot to bring the information about what it is. I've just learned about this in the last few days. But this ordinance would stop the construction of the Northern Pass energy facility dead. It would not be able to happen.
Is
it
it
would
a
ban
coal?
any unsustainable, I don't remember.
Don't remember what it
or
is?
I don't know. I haven't learned yet. But one of the folks from CELDF just sent me this last week. So, I mean, this is an example of what we could do. We could be, I'm going to be in Corvallis. If you know folks who can come to a workshop March 10th in the afternoon in Corvallis. And all these events are on my website at paulcienfuegos.com.
Right. We have a graphic for that. We might get that up there too really soon here.
So I'm leading a workshop somewhere almost every week in Oregon or Washington at this point. Actually, I'm going to be in Missoula next weekend, leading a 2-day workshop and giving a speech to the town of Missoula. Each one of these is focusing on a different issue. They're all battling some kind of corporate harm, which is legal under state law, but the town doesn't want it. And in fact, in Lancaster, the town unanimously voted against Northern Pass. But under state law, it doesn't matter. They're getting it anyway. So they're passing this to stop it. And this will stop it.
This will stop it.
And the reason that this will stop it, I'm sure folks who are watching are really cynical about what I'm saying here.
Well, they've lost so many battles, you know.
So here's why this is such unusual stuff. The corporation has to argue in a county court. That's where it starts. The corporation has to sue the town in a county court, and it has to argue as its primary argument that the corporation, has more constitutionally protected rights than the residents of that town. Well, that's not what a corporation's lawyers want to argue in the town of Lancaster, where the majority's already said, we don't want this thing, right? What does that do in a community that's been taught in civics that we the people are, in charge? Because that's what we were all taught.
It's going to radicalize
mythological story, right? Exactly. People don't go to sleep at that point. They say, this is an outrage. What do you mean Corporation X has more rights than we do?
Right.
Absolutely outrageous. That's an obscenity. And so you generate the next level of outrage.
Right.
And uprising.
Well, before we move on here, let's get that graphic up for the telephone. You mentioned Montana, and that might be just briefly we could talk about that, because Montana just decided that the Citizens United shouldn't be constitutional, and they tried to move against that, right?
The Supreme Court of Montana decided in a 5-2 decision just a couple weeks ago that they were not going to recognize the Citizens United decision,
which allowed unending money into the corporate.
Well, and again, this is. I'm also really bothered by our own independent media's coverage of Citizens United. So let me set the record straight about that.
All right.
We had unlimited money since 1976 in our elections. So every time you or the listener or the viewers hear, one of our ally groups or our independent media, Amy Goodman said it again today on Democracy Now!, once again, she said something that is not true. Citizens United did not open the floodgates for corporate money.
But it did do something.
It did do something, but it actually wasn't that significant. In 1976, in a Supreme Court decision, Buckley versus Vallejo, the floodgates for corporate money were opened. Mm-hmm. And the way that they did that was the Supreme Court equated money and speech.
Speech, right.
They said to limit how much money a corporation could donate to an election would be to limit its First Amendment right to speak. Free speech for corporations. That was the floodgates opening. What Citizens United did a couple of years ago, just a little bit more than 2 years ago, is it allows for the first time corporations to give their unlimited money from their general fund. Previously, they had to give unlimited money through PACs and individual donations.
You just made it easier
limits.
For them.
It was easier.
Yeah.
There were limits on how much a PAC could donate, a corporate PAC, but there were no limits on how many PACs a corporation could set up. Okay? So there was no limit. And it also makes it easier to be anonymous with donations. But anybody who's 30 years old, 40 years old, or older knows that we've had decades of corporate money completely overwhelming our elections. This is not something that started with Citizens United.
No,
and yet
I don't think anybody is saying that.
But that's how it's being reported. So Montana said, yeah, we're not going to abide by the Citizens United decision. And the Supreme Court has already stated that they're going to hear it again.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what that means.
We got the flashing sign for the first phone call.
Excellent.
First caller, you're on the air.
Hi, Jim.
Hello.
Hey, I was told by friends in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia years ago, standing on a bluff watching a coal train go into a tunnel under our feet, far below us, on the James River, that it is the coal cars that have torn up the nation's rail beds. The weight of those things, those tracks weren't built to just take that abuse forever. And we have not reinvested in the infrastructure or made the coal companies pay for the damage they've done. Anyone interested in viable, defensible, safe mass train transit in the future has to say no to coal trains on their tracks.
Absolutely.
Good point.
They have to build their own infrastructure going forward, or build a new one for us and keep the old one.
Well, yeah,
we can't share this cost from the bottom any longer.
Do you know that the tracks that are all over the United States are actually not public? That they're all owned by freight corporations?
I'm not surprised at that. I mean, they were all privately built in the mid to late 1800s with government help, but by private corporations.
That's right. Yeah,
they got vast tracts of real estate along the right of way
in exchange for putting in the tracks.
We have paid for this, and now they are destroying it.
Exactly.
That's not right.
Yeah. And then on top of that, you got 5, 10, 15 trains a day coming from Wyoming to Montana. If we let this happen, 100 to 150 coal cars per train. They're talking about a 1 to 2 hour blockage in a town or city, 1 to 2 additional hours a day that you can't walk or drive across your own track in a town because there's going to be coal trains coming by at 10 miles an hour with coal dust flying out of them.
In a town that may not even have a stoplight, but now they got a 2-hour one.
A 2-hour, right. So doctor's appointments, pick up your kid from school, whatever, forget it. Get to the beach, forget it.
Right. Caller, thank you for the call.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was a good point to bring up, because they hadn't. I was thinking about the coal dust in the air. I wasn't thinking about the inconvenience and the situation with the infrastructure this disappearing. Well, we also have another call here.
Great.
Next caller.
Well, hi, I don't want to interrupt, but I just had to tell the guests that I hope that you would contact the Amy Goodman Show, Democracy Now!
Straighten her out, huh?
Because you just explained something to me, and I listen. I'm retired and disabled, and I watch every underground I can and above ground to just see what the idiots are doing next. But no one has been so clear as you.
Well, thank you, and I should say I'm a huge fan of Amy Goodman and Juan Gonzalez and Democracy
You're
Now.
One of us, I know.
But let me say, I've been trying, and my colleagues at CELDF have been trying to get Democracy Now! To cover the community rights movement and to start giving a more nuanced description of Citizens United Supreme Court decision, and we haven't had any luck even getting them to return phone calls and emails.
You're kidding me.
No, I'm not.
I don't have a computer,
so
or I would, because I'm sure there's a way for me to get in touch with her.
No, there isn't
actually.
It's
remarkable how she missed you.
Yeah, it's every so often. If you go to somebody else's computer and you put Thomas Lindsay into Democracy Now!'s search engine, you'll find that he was interviewed for 6 or 8 minutes 2 or 3 years ago. You know, and that was about a Bill of Rights that Spokane, Washington had put on the ballot, which is also very exciting. I mean, here's another example of what the rights-based strategy can look like. Spokane, Washington, not exactly a left-wing community, right?
It's very Republican.
But it's very Republican, and it also has a long populist, pro-labor, pro-wobbly, right, IWW history. Very interesting town politically. And 2 years ago, they tried to pass a community Bill of Rights, and they got 25% of the vote. They were outspent. All the politicians opposed. All of the business associations opposed. They simplified the Bill of Rights last November and put it back on the ballot, and they lost by 0.7%, by only 1,000 votes. So they're going to run it one more time in a year or two, and they'll win. They'll certainly win. Let me tell you what it said. It's really remarkable. What almost won in Spokane last November, a 4-point community Bill of Rights. One, neighborhoods by majority vote shall for the first time have the right to veto industrial and commercial developments they don't want in Spokane.
That's pretty
huge. Neighborhoods, right? Again, right now, corporate property rights trump the rights of neighborhoods.
It's a right to make profit trumps it, I think, is what it gets down to.
Actually, it's not a right. What it is, it's crazy. In 1919, the Supreme Court decided in a really wild case that corporations were required to maximize profit for the first
shareholders.
Time. For shareholders.
Right, yeah.
Up until then, you could actually be a corporate CEO and have different goals for your company. But from 1919 on, that was no longer legal. The Supreme Court deemed it so. So each of these is Supreme Court decisions that are changing what the corporation is. So the second one is, in the Community Bill of Rights, is workers shall no longer lose their Bill of Rights protections when entering the workplace. I don't know if you or viewers know this, but when you go to work every morning, you shelve your First Amendment rights, your contract rights, your right against unreasonable search and seizure, a urine test, right? Privacy.
Yeah.
You shelve all sorts of rights. The corporation maintains all those rights while you're at work. Same when you enter a shopping mall, right? You try to enter a shopping mall with a card table and flyers and speak at this volume in a mall and hand out flyers, and you'll last about 2 minutes. You will
gather
be arrested.
Signatures for an initiative or something.
And why is that? Because corporate First Amendment free speech rights trump your First Amendment free speech rights because you're on corporate property. Right?
How about a sole proprietorship? It'd be the same thing then, wouldn't it?
It's very different. Then it's a person versus a person.
Ah.
And then there's no trumping involved. Then it's rights versus rights of actual human beings.
Well, go ahead and finish
so anyway,
that. Then we got another
finish,
call. Sure.
The third one, so rights, workers don't lose their rights anymore. The third one is the Spokane River and Spokane Aquifer shall have recognized constitutionally protected rights of nature.
Oh, wow.
And the fourth one is any time that a corporate constitutional right interferes in implementing one of those rights I just mentioned, the corporate right shall be nullified.
And natural persons are sovereign.
Natural persons and nature.
And nature are sovereign.
Have more rights than corporations
That's
do.
incredible.
So, and that almost passed in Spokane last November.
That should pass.
We're not talking, again, these are not ideologically oriented ordinances. This is rights-based stuff. It's about
very nuts and bolts.
Who is in charge in Portland? The people who live here, or the absentee corporations who use this place like their playground?
Mm-hmm.
That's the ultimate question is, in this democratic republic, who's in charge? That's what this whole movement is about. We're forcing into public space that conversation. We're going to force it into courtrooms. We're going to pass thousands of ordinances across the United States. My personal goal is to help mobilize 5 or 10 or 20 in the next year or two here in Oregon.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm leading workshops all over the state.
That's a noble goal. Well, I think we have another caller. Get the next caller.
Hey, guys. How's it going?
Hey, pretty good. Welcome to the program.
I just had a question for you guys regarding all that. It's like, who do you think would be the best presidential candidate to restore hemp?
Restore hemp or deal with corporate rights?
Oh, and the corporate rights as well.
None of the existing candidates.
The existing candidates.
I would say, well, none of the existing corporate mainstream candidates.
Right.
The various candidates who are vying for the Green Party nomination, every one of them would do a perfect job at ending corporate constitutional rights. But again, we live in a system where the Republicans and Democrats control the debate system now through the Bipartisan Debate Commission, which they own.
You never see the Green Party even ever up there.
Well, that's what I'm saying. And you don't, because all of the televised debates now are run by the two corporate parties.
The media, which is the same thing.
They threw out the League of Women Voters years ago, which always ran the presidential debates.
They don't even give the other options, liberal, any other third party.
And then third parties also have to fight for ballot recognition state by state, election after election, just to appear on the ballot. They have to fight to get on the ballot.
Which takes
a completely... Even then, their polls are so skewed.
Right. They don't even ask if you support a Green candidate. That's just other. Right. We're living in a corporate state. We're living in a minority rule corporate state with two corporate parties that both get a majority of their money from corporations.
Man. I love your show, man.
All right. Thank you. That he might have said hemp, but he did mean corporations. And is there any?
But hemp is a corporate. I mean, that's a corporate rule issue too.
But ultimately, that's where it came from.
That's where it came from.
Is there any moves anywhere in the country to do anything other than make medical marijuana? Because it's industrial. It's not. It's medical. It's industrial.
You could use these ordinances to force into the legal status the legal growing of hemp, industrial hemp,
for textiles.
You could do that in like the Willamette, a place where agricultural crops are grown, flat lands, right?
I understand they've actually passed some things down there in Salem that would allow that to happen. I don't know. They tried to. I don't know if it ever passed.
Well, I don't think it passed, or we would be hearing that they'd be growing hemp.
All of Eastern Oregon and all the farmers would be all for that.
Absolutely.
Because there's so many, like we're saying, the corporate control is preventing as much as it's doing things wrong. And that's something we need to talk about.
It's stopping us from doing what we need. Right. I give a speech to the transition movement in mid-January. You can see the text of my speech on my website, again, paulcienfuegos.com. I said to the Portland transition group, you folks are all about trying to figure out how, as rapidly as possible, we can transition away from fossil fuels and deal with the climate change and the peak oil crises, right? I mean, that's what the whole transition international movement is about. And yet they won't tackle governance. They won't tackle the question of who's in charge. So I did a speech to them last month that said,
another call.
That said, it's one thing to be organizing at the neighborhood level, right? To be getting neighborhoods to voluntarily do this, but we need to pass laws that require sustainability, right? And we could be doing that. We could be requiring affordable, healthy food for all. We could be requiring renewable energy for all. We could be requiring no GMOs. Right? We could be requiring that supermarkets sell a certain percentage of their store shelves to locally produced goods, right? we are so colonized. The people in this country are so unbelievably colonized in our minds.
Especially in food and
that
energy.
We don't realize we are in charge. We are the sovereign people. We have self-governing authority. Just read the opening paragraph of your state constitution.
As you did at the outset of the program.
You'll be stunned.
Right. I think we have another call. We got about little over 8 minutes. Next caller.
Hello.
Hello, you're on the air.
Hello, I just wanted to know what fracking was. I'm sorry, I've been listening and...
Sorry, yeah, I should have defined it.
That's fracking a very good question.
It's the fracturing of rock to get at seeps of natural gas. We're at peak natural gas pretty soon, and so natural gas is no longer available the way it used to be, where you just drill a hole and tons of natural gas becomes available under pressure. So now we're in the final stages of getting at our own natural gas, and so you've got to drill a hole a mile and a half deep into rock. You pour thousands and thousands of gallons of water and dozens of toxic chemicals, which the industry won't tell us what they are,
proprietary,
into the hole. Right. And by the way, proprietary information, proprietary rights for a corporation, that's the constitutional right to not speak.
Right.
That's another Supreme Court decision. Mm-hmm. They won free speech, and then they won the right to not speak.
Not speak. Yeah.
Right. That becomes proprietary, right? We don't have to tell you. So they pour this in, and that forces the seeps of natural gas out, and out comes also contaminated water, right? That now is mixed with dozens of toxic chemicals and some radioactive chemicals.
And in people's wells.
And so there's a great movie called... I'm
trying to remember the name of it. I can't remember the name of it.
Yeah.
It had to do with fracking.
There's a documentary that was nominated for an Academy Award a year or two ago that's terrific, that's all about fracking, and it shows people... There's 30 states now in the U.S. where fracking's happening. 30 states. And it's coming to Oregon, and it's coming to all 3 West Coast states. We think this, if we think it's like a New Mexico, Texas, East Coast, thing, we're mistaken. So, and you end up with creeks that are flammable. You end up with water coming out of your kitchen tap that's flammable. That's the natural response if we allow it. Pittsburgh's banned it, and about a half a dozen other small towns in Pennsylvania and Maryland have banned it through this community rights process.
But at the same time, the corporate lawyers have been able to keep the proof that this is causing the folks' water to light on fire and the poison. That they haven't been able to prove that in court anywhere yet. It seems like to me.
Well, see, the problem is when you're within the regulatory structure, you have to prove that that the stuff is getting in the water. If you step out of the regulatory structure and you pass these kind of ordinances, that's not what the court case is about. The court case is about, does the corporation have the right to do this in our community? It's about rights. We're no longer arguing about whether fracking is safe, whether clear cutting is sustainable, whether toxic sludge on farmland is fertilizer, right?
Yeah, right.
There's all of this crap that we're always arguing about in court, because we're in the wrong legal structure. We're in the regulatory structure. We're begging regulatory agencies to save us from all these corporate harms. The entire environmental movement is stuck there. The entire labor movement is stuck there. We need to step out of labor and environmental regulatory law and pass rights-based laws. And then we have a completely different kind of lawsuit that's a lawsuit of our choosing.
You need to be down at the Environmental Law Conference coming up.
There have been people like me who've been speaking there year after year, and we're pretty much just ignored. The environmental movement is a regulatory law movement.
Well, because it's lawyers.
And they're going to have to step... Well, no, we have lawyers too, but you have to get to a point where... I mean, let's be honest, folks. If all of these thousands of environmental organizations that we have in the country were succeeding, would our environment be getting healthier? Yes, of course.
It would be.
Is our environment getting healthier? Absolutely not. It's a crisis.
And the climate.
The climate is an absolute crisis.
Yeah. That's true. Well, I appreciate the call.
Nobody else. Okay.
Nobody else? Well, there may be another when we have a little over 4 minutes. But unless you have something you specifically want to go to, I'd like to bring all this to bear on the GMOs.
Yeah, so...
Because the GMOs, to me, that 900-pound gorilla in this country is Monsanto.
Yeah, agreed.
You know?
So, in the Willamette Valley, I've been starting to have conversations with some of the organic farmers in the Willamette Valley. I mean, I'm all over the state. It's really quite a fun job that I have here.
Sounds like it. I envy you.
and I'm leading a workshop on Saturday, March 10, from 1 to 4, at the Corvallis Food Co-op, which is called First Alternative Co-op. And anybody who's at all interested in GMO agriculture and wants to learn how we could pass a county-based ordinance, a rights-based ordinance in Benton County and Lynn County and the other counties of the Willamette Valley. There are 4 counties where agriculture is happening in the Willamette Valley. And in every one of those, we could pass an agricultural ban on all genetically modified organisms being planted in those counties. We could use this rights-based structure to do that. And I'm leading an introductory workshop there.
So www.paulcienfuegos.com.
Yeah,
I think we got 3 minutes and one more call. Next caller, you got about a minute here. Hello, next caller.
Yeah, I have a question. With the do you ever promote the geothermal or wind to hydrogen? Is that anything you advocate for?
I'm not actually advocating for anything in particular. My work as a community organizer is to go into a town and find out what people want. It's not really up to me. So in the Willamette Valley, people are clamoring to figure out how to stop GMO wheat from coming in, because it's a year or 2 away. They already have GMO beets. You know, in Portland, it may be coal trains. It may be something else. You know, so yeah, I support those, but that's not really that important what I support, because that's not really what I'm doing. It's about what communities want. It's what Portland wants. And by the way, we've founded a group in Portland here just a month ago, a community rights PDX. Was just founded here, and we're in the early stages of developing ideas for an ordinance campaign. And you'll be hearing about us by the end of this year.
Well, since you said you had Portland was on that map up there about the coal train, so that might be a really good one there.
Yeah.
You know, I know that there's the LNG. There, you know, the LNG. They were talking about bringing liquefied natural gas in. Now they're talking about moving it out.
So again, any town or county that those pipelines pass through could run one of these ordinances and stop that. And they would be creating a crisis of jurisdiction in their community against state and federal law. And that's what we need. We need to be committing municipal acts of civil disobedience. It's urgent. It's absolutely urgent, because the way our activism is currently working conventionally doesn't work.
Right. Well, it seems to me that the direct action has always been the way to get things done, at least if only to stall things until something else could be brought to bear. And this is a form of that. Well, we got right at a minute. Anything you want to do to polish this off?
I'd love my website to go back on the screen. That would be great, because I have a lot of information on my website, and my schedule is on my website. Is it coming?
It'll be up in a second. There it is. All right.
And I just want people to know that there's a lot of articles. There's also links to the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund from there. They're the folks that have written these 150 ordinances for these communities. You can read the ordinances via my website or via CELDF's website. You can see my schedule. I was twice on David Barsamion's alternative radio series in the last couple of years. And I would just love you to get involved in the rights-based work.
All right.
Whatever issue you're in, get out of the regulatory battle and get into rights-based organizing.
Well, Paul, we'll bring you back on the program again in the future. This has been very illuminating.
All right.
And we got to get on Amy.
Yeah,
so,
let's get on Amy.
Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for the crew. We'll see you next week.